Welcome to the Needless Things Creators Series. I'm your host, Dave West, and this is where we talk to creators about the things that they create. Today's guest is Brian Flynn from Super 7. Brian Flynn, welcome to the Needless Things YouTube channel. We're happy to have you here.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's best way to spend the Friday, right? I get to call this work. So
Yeah, you're talking about toys is work, which you are living the dream, which is one of the reasons that I've been wanting to talk to you for quite some time, because I'm a big fan of Super 7, which is no secret to anybody who's been watching Needless Things for any amount of time. But we got a lot to talk about today. But I want to kind of dip into a couple of things before we get to the heavy hitters, the San Diego Comic-Con stuff, which, by the way, considering how busy you must be right now, I truly appreciate you taking the time to do this.
at this point, it's all whether it made a truck or not. All the work has been done. There will be work that comes once we actually are at the event. We got to get it all going and everything. But from now until then, right now it's just like, did it make a truck? Is it going on a plane? Is it getting checked in my luggage? Like, where's this prototype? Like, it's just hurry up and wait at this point. So surprisingly, like this week, next week is a little bit of downtime.
Oh, wow. That's I would imagine that's almost the worst part of it, though, is like, because when you're in it, when you're preparing things, you're busy, your brain is moving, like it's all about let's get it ready. And now the waiting is probably got to be killing you a little bit.
Well, I got plenty of other stuff I got to get done. So,
Right.
but it's not like, the panic of, is this going to happen or is this not going to happen? It's just like, all right, we know now. Like, we know what's going to be here and what's not going to be here. And what samples we'll show, what samples we won't show, those kind of things.
So speaking of conventions, I got to meet you at Joe Fest, where I got my Cobra Mortal signed by you. And just so you're aware,
I have ruined that toy for all potential resale value.
It's fine because I have other ruined reaction figures. I've got a Duke signed by Michael Bell.
There you go.
You're in good company. And I don't know if a lot of people think about this. The reaction figures are perfect to get signed. They've got all that space on the card. Arthur Burghardt had a lot of fun with this one.
That's funny because I'm so used to signing the bubbles because.
Well, and that's what Gem did.
Yeah, because they're like, oh, you don't want to mess up the artwork, so I signed the bubble.
What I do, this is how maniacal I am with the reaction stuff, because it's, to me, like I've got a bunch of them opened up because they're fun toys, but for the most part, I like it to keep them on the card because of what you said. The artwork is incredible. It's a piece of art. It's a little piece of art you can buy for a reasonable price. But if I'm going to get one signed, I'm going to have a duplicate not signed. So for me, signing those things is just wherever it works best for whoever's signing it. But you were at Joe Fest, and I was so impressed because you were very gracious with your time, but also you hung out in that booth the whole time pretty much.
Other than when I was, trying to get a little bit of shopping in, why wouldn't I? It was a surprising comment to me too, where people are like, well, we knew Super 7 was coming, but why are you here? And I'm like, why wouldn't I be here? It was like, so anyways, we're going to go to a toy convention for the whole weekend. Are you cool with that? Like, oh yeah. Why wouldn't I be,
Not every creator, not every head of a toy company would be willing to hang out in that way. It's definitely a cool thing. And again, another aspect of Super 7 that I think the fans appreciate.
The ones that are prone to like us, yeah, they're going to appreciate that. The ones that don't like us, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and I've encountered some. I've done quite a few Super 7 reviews, so I know. But
it's always fascinating to me that in this, especially now, like I think we talked about this. Maybe I talked about it with plenty of people at Joe Fest where they would talk about, different kinds of fans and how people react to things. I'm like, I realize if you've been collecting a long time, like a lot of us have, there was a time where very little was getting made. So whatever came out, you were going to buy, whether you liked it or not, because that was all that you got. We're in a position now where there's so much being made by so many different people in so many formats, and it's such a high level, you can pick and choose. So if you don't like which version I'm making, that's fine because somebody else is making something you do like.
Yes.
Like I don't understand why people are so like, if it's not the exact one that I want in my brain that I've been thinking about, it's wrong and it's terrible. It's like, you do know that there's more than one kind of collector out there.
That's the thing that's wild to me, and not just in toys, but really in everything in life. The whole if I don't like it, it's no good mentality is wild to me.
And I can guarantee you that any collector on here, there was a toy when you started collecting that you poo-pooed or pushed off to the side and said you didn't like. And 10 years later, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it, but now I understand it. And now I need all that stuff again.
There's so much stuff that I passed up on that I look back and I think, oh, I should have gotten that. But the worst is the stuff that I did get and just didn't, maybe got because, like you said, there just wasn't much on the market at the time. Like you can go back to so many different licenses, franchises, whatever, and look at times where it was just dry and whatever came out you bought because, like, if it's a Creature from the Black Lagoon Pog in 1994, you're going to buy it because what else was there?
Right.
21st Century Toys hadn't come along yet. So you'll buy whatever. And then you get rid of that Pog. And then 30 years later, you're like, man, I wish I still had that Pog.
Or you start filling up, you'll have gotten rare stuff that wasn't your focus. Like same thing. I remember very early when I was in collecting, you're talking about 92 or 93. I got a Star Wars shelf talker, one of those little danglers, like you put a piece and it hangs out.
Mm-hmm.
And it said 3 new figures now available. Collect all 12. So we talk about Star Wars as being the original 12. Well, actually only 9 made it to shelf first. And then 3 more made it to shelf. It's actually like the original 9, then the 12, then the 20, then Boba Fett. We're getting minutia, but I had that, and it's a rare piece. Like I was still working on lots of other things where I'm just trying to finish the set. Yeah. So I ended up trading that away actually for a whole lot of Japanese vinyl toys. A big lot had come through, and I was like, oh, I got 500 in trade credit off this thing that I don't care about.
Yeah.
I can tell you to this day, I am still looking to replace it and have not been able to.
Man, but
at the same time, I don't necessarily regret doing it because the stuff I got, I also loved. So, but yeah, there's that thing where you're like, it's just a piece of plastic for a promo. I mean, it's kind of neat, whatever, moving on. And then you're like, later, you're like, oh, I fucked up. But so be it. I've won more times than I've lost, so I'm happy.
And that's the thing is like a lot of times there's a specific, like with G.I. Joe, maybe there's a specific figure I'm looking for and I'm like, oh, I gotta get my hands on Fast Draw, whatever it may be. And you got to think about the fact there's tons and tons and tons of Fast Draws out there. But if it's a shelf talker or the other licensed stuff, which fascinates me, this is actually, I love this stuff.
Oh yeah.
Dude,
I can actually go in the other room and pull a tin Ultraman trash can right now.
All of that 10 stuff. So when I got that garbage can, it kind of led, because in the 80s, we all had those, whether they had a Ferrari on them or G.I. Joe or whatever, Strawberry Shortcake, like every license made it onto those trash cans.
You're going to make me do this now. Hold on.
Do it. I love this. You guys know, anybody watching right now knows I love this stuff that's like toy adjacent. Yes.
See?
Oh my gosh, look at that.
There's the Mirror Man one. And there's Ultraman
Oh,
fighting
that's
Devora.
beautiful.
So, yeah.
And do you know, I didn't know this until I kind of looked this stuff up, that the company that made like the TV trays and the trash cans and all that started off as a 10 toy company.
Yeah.
I had no idea because I had never even thought about it before.
Yeah. They're like, oh, we can make more than toys.
Right.
I'm sorry, we took it off on a tangent there, but
It's
yeah,
fine.
it's the same thing. You know, it's like with the G.I. Joe stuff. It's like, you know, the Chinese stuff and the Japanese stuff was always dirt cheap, and I still have plenty of that, the carded ones. But it's like I had some of the Russian carded stuff, but it was like, whatever, you know, got rid of it. Now I would like, oh man, would love to get those Russian G.I. Joes again. You know, and I remember the first time we did the unboxing convention in Mexico City, which isn't around anymore. We went down there, and it was like I was offered all those Mexican G.I. Joes in the boxes.
Oh gosh.
And I was just like, oh, you know, it's a lot of money. You know, they were like $200 or $300 a piece. I was just like, it's just a lot of money. It's going to open up a whole new well. I'm going to want them all. Like, so I left, like, I had the opportunity to buy like 4 of them and I didn't. And it's that same thing where you're just like,
I know. Yeah. Well, and that's another fascinating thing that Super 7 has done. You guys have gone into pulling ideas from international releases for toy lines like the Cobra Mortal and the Glenda, the Masters of the Universe window box figures that you guys released. And I love the fact that you seem to be willing to pull inspiration from pretty much anywhere because it looks cool.
Well, part of it looks cool. And, you know, there's, once again, there's more collectors out there than just us.
Right.
And so same thing, the first, you know, we'll use Masters and unboxing. Like the first year we went to unboxing, you know, we're like, oh, you know, Mexico City, we'll see how this goes. This is going to be interesting. And, you know, I'm thinking about certain things that I know of that exist down there, especially like the 1960s and 1970s blow molded bootlegs and whatever. And we get down there and it's a really big deal that we have shown up. And this is a good convention. Like, this isn't like, oh, whatever. This is like, oh, wow. Like, people had stuff on displays. Like, there's missile firing fets, prototypes, boxed Letty, Captain Action type stuff, like shit where I'm just like, what is, I didn't even know this existed. And yet here's a mint boxed one. And what we realized was we went down there was how popular Masters was in Mexico. Mm-hmm. So if you go to Mexico, it's sort of like there's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is like number 1. Then it's like Transformers. Then it's Masters of the Universe. And Star Wars and Marvel are way down here. Masters is massive. The line that existed, people camped out overnight to be able to buy the toys that we brought just because now it made it easy for them to get them. And so we're like, this is insane. When we come back next year, we need to have something that speaks even more. So we were like, all right, we're going to come back and bring Masters of the Universe, but packaged in boxes the way the Letty stuff was in Mexico. But it's also saying your history in this license is just as relevant and just as important than the American point of view. Like, let's not diminish that. Yeah. Like, just we're American centric because America's giant and it's the biggest, you know, economy on earth. So people, you know, you focus on that American point of view. Right. But somebody in Mexico might love Masters just as much as you, and it was just as important as their life, but their path and their experience with Masters was completely different. So I want to be like, that is just as relevant and just as important as this version. So let's make this too. And then the year after that, we went down and we made reaction figures that were recolored to match a bunch of the Spanish books that were made where you had weird colored, pink Skeletors and stuff like that. And you're like, this is just as much part of canon as the American stuff.
That's somebody's Skeletor.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody out there, that's the first Skeletor they ever saw. And then to people who are engaged with Masters of the Universe, who do love it as a brand, like, that's interesting. That's cool stuff. That's fun. And that's, again, that's what Super 7 does so well, is bringing that stuff to light. Only in the last few years, since we started the G.I. Joe podcast, have I really become more familiar. I'm not going to say really become more familiar with Action Force.
Yep.
And how that is, as you're saying, just as vital a component of the history of Real American Hero, to many people, as what I grew up with.
And then if you take it 12 steps backwards, there's so many sinews that go out. So if you take it 12 steps backwards to Henshin Cyborg,
mm-hmm.
and you guys, I'm going to assume that anybody watching this G.I. Joe podcast will understand the relationship between 12-inch G.I. Joes and Henshin Cyborgs in Japan, right? So we're going to.
And if they don't, they know to look it up.
Okay. And then, how that is a straight line to Transformers. That Transformers are essentially G.I. Joe universe. So that makes sense in what they're doing in the movies. But then when you go to the UK, they take a couple of the Henshin Cyborgs and they scale them down to 8 inches. And I can't remember the exact name of the line. I want to say they called it Dennis Fisher's Cyborg, but that's not quite right. But they scale them down to 8 inches and sell them in the UK. But then taking those 8-inch cyborgs, which is where Muton, whichever you want to use his name, it's a different figure, but the name and all that exists. And then the takedown of that line is what becomes Action Force. So then there's still this sinewy line going back to the original 12-inch that makes its way to what they end up doing in the 3 3/4 Action Force line. You get Muton again, but this time he's the diving helmet with the fucking radar screens. It's so cool. The clear green. He's my favorite from that line.
He's incredible. Christian, who you also met at Joe Fest, got one at Joe Fest, and he was like, guys, I found it, and it's nuts, and I love it.
Yeah, it makes no sense, and it's great, and it's with the clear green. You attach it onto the parts. It's wonderful. But then that gets sucked back in to G.I. Joe. And then you have these 5 POA figures with the O-ring figures all mixing together and creating this whole world, along with British SAS forces and all sorts of other stuff. And it's this whole other world. But yeah, if you were in England, that's your G.I. Joe.
Right.
And that emotional experience is no less relevant than the emotional experience
that's right.
of what you went through. And I think that, so when I look at that stuff, it's like, I want to play all over the world.
Well, and that kind of goes along with my view of fandom. Like fandom, I just want it blown wide open, because to me, do you like Star Wars? Yes, I do. Well, then you're a fan of Star Wars. Like I'm not a fan of the gatekeeping or the perspective of like, well, it has to be exactly this way, or it's not actually this thing. Because everybody, even if you're not talking about other countries, everybody took this stuff in differently.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a perfect example. You leave the United States, Star Wars is not that big of a deal.
Right. Well, so out of the stuff that we've kind of talked about so far, would you say Ninja Turtles is one of the bigger worldwide phenomenons?
Ninja Turtles is pretty darn big around the world. Ironically, Godzilla is big around the world except Japan.
That's wild. I didn't know that.
He's like the number 3. You have, it's Ultraman is number 1.
Okay.
Kamen Rider is number 2. And then you get to Godzilla. And it's like a distant third.
Wow.
But then you leave Japan and it's massive. That's why if you think about in recent years, there's not that much media that comes out around Godzilla aside from the US stuff that's come out.
Yeah.
Then -1 comes out and it's amazing, and maybe the best, or it can't be the best. It can be the second best Godzilla movie ever, because 54 is always going to be the
Of
best.
course.
But yeah, it's fascinating to look at some of these things. Like, G.I. Joe's a really good example. Like, it plays well in the United States, it plays pretty well in England, and then there's a pretty steep decline because go figure, the rest of the world wasn't interested in playing with American military figures.
Right.
I don't think we ever looked at it, at least for me when I was a kid, I never looked at it as being American military. I looked at it as American adventure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in a worldview, it's very hard to look at that way, because you're like, because they're in, G.I. Joe's traveling to some exotic place. Well, they're like, I'm not an exotic place. That exotic place is where I live.
Right.
And you're like, oh, when you think about it from that perspective, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And that's, well, and G.I. Joe, even in the 80s, it was presented, the comics, you had the Sunbow cartoon, which were not as different as some people like to claim, but very different things.
Divergent, yeah.
Whereas Sunbow was very fantastical, and as you said, didn't feel as American military, felt more, just group of adventurers doing things. So I wanted to kind of do a history.
This has got all those questions you had lined up. We haven't touched on one of them.
Nothing. It doesn't matter. Look, I wanted to get a little bit into the history of Super 7, but you can go to the website and check out the About Us section, because this conversational thing that we're doing, this is what I enjoy. This is what I like. We can briefly touch on. My buddy Paul is the one that introduced me to you guys. Christian has expanded my knowledge. That's right. Paul Lepre. Everybody shop the Pop in Louisville, Kentucky.
There you go.
Paul long ago tried to get me interested in the vinyl toys and the designer stuff. And I was like, no, I like my off the shelf things. Thank you very much. And I kind of still am. I'd rather have 10 mass market retail figures than the one,
You're almost presenting it as like you need to make a caveat. You don't. You like what you like. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Even me. No.
Here's the thing, though. I love that stuff. Matter of fact, one of the ones I've got, two of the things that I've got a Billy Bob vinyl toy from Showbiz Pizza that came out years ago that I had to have because I'm from Georgia.
That was made by Justin. Oh God,
Ishmael.
His black name. Yeah,
Justin Ishmael.
Yep.
And I grew up in Georgia. I loved Showbiz Pizza, and I was furious when Chuck E. Cheese came in and ran them out. So I had to have that one, and then I've got a Pugloo. Or Pug from Planet Pugloo. I can't remember what it's called. So like every once in a while one gets me and I just cannot help myself. I can't. They're gorgeous pieces of art. Well, and a few years ago I had Tim Clark, who designed Boglins and Sectars.
And Sectars, yeah.
Before Boglins came back, I had him on the old show, and he was doing totems at the time, which are these really cool, like wild, grotesque totems that he was doing. Beautiful stuff. And I can appreciate that stuff, and I love it. And that's where you guys kind of got your start after the magazine. Is that right? Well,
not after, during.
Okay.
So if you come back to the Genesis, let's talk about it then the magazine, because it's hard to separate the two.
Sure.
So for me, summer after my sophomore year of college, I came home. So this would be summer of 1991. And I was like, I want my Star Wars toys again. So when people talk to me, I always start with Star Wars, and then I work my way out. That's, kind of thing. And I was like, I want my Star Wars toys again. Now in 1991, no one was looking, no one cared. So it was actually quite easy to collect them all, like I did it that summer.
Do you remember what sparked that? Was it random, or did you watch one of the movies and you know what?
Just all of a sudden I was like, I want my Star Wars figures. I don't know what it was. So I was like, I should go to garage sales or flea markets. Now garage sales requires getting up extra early. So I instead went to a flea market. I found a flea market, and I went to a flea market very randomly. And there was a guy that was selling vintage toys in the flea market. He had a little kind of 10 by 10 space. and you could buy complete Star Wars figures with weapons for $5 each, or loose figures without weapons for $3 each. And I was like, I remember going in there going, $5? Fuck that. And I bought a Stormtrooper just to buy one. And then I walked around the flea market and found a couple for like a quarter, or whatever. And then I started kind of asking around, and naturally there were people in the neighborhood or whatever, like, oh, that shit's in my garage. I'll give you $20 for your whole collection. Like, couldn't give it to me fast enough. So within a summer, I was done. But that was also the year, I think it was Action Figure News and Toy Review came out.
Oh, wow.
It was the summer of 91. So I remember when the first issues came out. Let me rephrase that. I believe that I saw issue 3 when it hit the shelf.
Okay.
So I had already been looking for stuff when 1 and 2 came out, but I didn't see them like on the newsstand, because how are you going to find them in the newsstand, right? But Action Figure News came out in 91 or 92. And I remember seeing it. So the guy that owned that little tiny toy shop had them because, it talked a lot about 12-inch figures and, clothes, and it had a little price guide in it. And if you look at it at that time, if you look in the early ones, the price guide, it was like Anakin Skywalker is the rarest Star Wars figure of all.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I remember that.
Which is completely untrue. So that was sort of the beginning of it. But the magazines for anybody that's our age were important. They were a great sense of news.
Well, I remember seeing when in, I think it was 95 when they relaunched they launched the Power of the Force line.
Yep.
That cover, I can see in my head, like how exciting it was. My district manager at the time, I worked at a place called Video Game Exchange, and the district manager also collected toys. And I remember him bringing that in and being like, look at this.
I remember that from the when I believe it was Action. I can't remember if it was Tomarts or AFN.
Yeah, I don't remember which one
now.
it was.
But when they posted the alien prototypes on the cover, it was just like, it was literally like the shot heard round the world for anybody that collected toys.
Yeah,
which we can talk about later, because that's how we got to making reaction.
Yes, yes.
Circling it back. If you talk about 2001 when the magazine launched, so in 2000, there's a book that came out on Chronicle, my friend Jimbo Madison put together, called So Crazy Japanese Toys. And it's just pictures of wacky Japanese toys. That book is about a third my toys, a third Mark Nagato's toys, and a third toys from Kimono My House and a few other places that he all put together and he photographed. When that book was done, Chronicle says, hey, we want a volume 2. And I was like, I'm not really interested in working on a volume 2. Jimbo wasn't really interested. And I said, what I would be interested in doing is I can do a punk rock fanzine. That I can do. At the same time, I'm a working professional designer. So we'll talk about that later. We'll get to it. So I'm a working professional designer at that point. So I know how to do pre-press. It was the advent of digital photography, so I could take digital photographs myself. So I could do all the stuff. Instead of making it look like a black and white fanzine, it could look like a magazine, but it was still approached as a fanzine. So I'll also bookend that. At that time, AFN was out, Tomarts was out, the Wizards Toy Fan magazine was out. So if you needed news about American toys,
it was out there.
You had 3 different places to go to. Nobody needs me writing an article about obscure, whatever. Could have been obscure G.I. Joes. It's covered. They've got it covered. Japanese toys, no one's really talking about. And quite frankly, the audience is probably this big.
Right.
So we approached that first issue like a traditional, like releasing a punk rock record or a zine or anything that my friends had done. It was like we printed 5,000 copies. It cost us about $5,000 to make the print run. So my goal was to sell 7 ads for $500 each and then sell 300 copies at $5 each. And if I did that, we broke even. If we break even, we get the magazine for free.
Yeah.
Like we won. We got all of our money back. And even if you told me I'd lose a couple $100, if you told me for $200 you could print 5,000 magazines and give them out to everybody in the world and people would actually buy them, that's a win.
And that spirit of creation I love so much that, no, I just want to get it made. Like,
Yeah.
sure, it would be great to get some of that cream off the top, but I just want it made so I can hold it in my hands.
The point, same thing coming out of punk in the 80s and everything and into the 90s. This is obviously 2001. Like there is no money.
Yeah.
So the point is to be a participant, and that is all. So this is how I participate. People ask me all the time, there's no reference. So I'm going to write down everything I've learned and know about this stuff. And so when you talk about vinyl, though, obviously that is it's like almost all of my action figure collections were completed in the early 90s. And since then, it's just been like, oh, this weird variant that nobody knew popped up. Okay, I need that. It's not like, it's like, do you need Crystar? It's like, check. Black Hole, check. Although I don't have an Inhumanoid because I've never been willing to pay the money. But you want Clash of the Titans, Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers. Like I completed those lines 30 years ago. Like, with G.I. Joe, it's like I have the basic run.
Yeah.
I don't have everything ever, but it was like I got the stuff that was of my era and time. And, I keep up with, but like I have it all. It's like, so anytime it's like, oh, Red Bar R5D4, shit, now I got to find one, to keep the collections complete. But once I did that, I got into Japanese vinyl very, very heavy because it was really hard to collect. It was really in America. It's very difficult. And I got there through Shogun Warriors that led me to, I never, other than the Shogun Godzilla there in the 80s, the Imperial, like there are no Godzilla toys to collect. There's, you can find lighters and all this, but now all of a sudden this door opens up and it's like the Pandora's box of what's been made for Godzilla. And then in that same regard, all the wackiness that exists in Japanese vinyl, where their TV shows, they weren't trying to make them believable. They were trying to make them fantastical and fun. So it'll be like, all right, it's a severed hand on legs with eyeballs on fingers. It's a locker that sprouts arms and legs and fights you. Like it just like, well, huh? That was so appealing to me because it was just completely free.
Well, and we got a taste of that in the 80s with the Muscle line.
Yeah.
Those kinds of characters.
Which is a 10-second diversion even then. The guy that sculpted 99% of all the muscles was actually the guy. He sculpted about half the Bullmark standard figures, monsters, and he did all the wax masters for every vintage Marathon and Bullmark figure ever.
Oh,
and then after he was done with that, because I interviewed him about this, he said he was at a meeting with them. His kid collected read the Kaneka Man manga. He talks about it as like, look, I gotta sculpt, I gotta make money. So he then talked to the president, I think it was Bandai, and said, hey, here's this thing I'm working on, these little Kaneka Man figures, because he was like, at that size, I can do 3 a day.
Oh my gosh.
So, and then that turned into a thing, and he's actually famous for that. But like, he's done so much more, but it was like, it's the same thing. It was just like, his whole thing was like, by doing them this size, I can do 3 a day. Where at this size, it takes me I can only do 1 a day.
Isn't it funny how artists, creators, whatever, can end up being known for this thing? I think of Ron Rudat, who designed so many of the original G.I. Joe figures, but to wrestling fans, he's the Hasbro WWF guy.
Yeah.
And that's not, it's not his area of interest in the way that G.I. Joe is, but it's so funny how just different things can land differently like that.
Yeah. And so going back to all of our other things, because I sidebar way too much, is that in the very first issue of the magazine, what you would have in Japan is to get subscriptions up, they'd have a coupon in the magazine that you had to physically cut out and fill out with your name and send a check to get an exclusive paint variant of a vinyl. So I wanted to replicate that experience for American collectors. So we partnered in the first issue with M1 and Bear Model to make repaints of figures from Japan, where you literally had to cut out the coupon from the magazine and plus a check and send it in. But we dealt with what those remakes would be. Like, with Bare Model, we were like, I want a clear gray Godzilla 54 so it looks like it's underwater. And that was sort of the beginning of then us taking an American sensibility and applying it to Japanese vinyl toys, which was a radically different point of view. And we actually became, for a lot of people, it was like the magazine was almost secondary. We became this crazy toy manufacturer / importer where we weren't making our own stuff, but we would collaborate on so many different projects with so many different manufacturers and recolor them and remake them in ways that we liked. And that became this, that literally sort of overtook the magazine in short order.
So you mentioned the Alien reaction figures, which were my first, without, anybody pointing me in the direction, was my first exposure to what is this Super 7 and is this really happening? Because I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the first time I saw any kind of like ad or presentation of them, I thought, oh, this is just some mock-up somebody is doing.
Yeah. So what we did there was, if we go through Super 7, we were in business for like a decade, and we built ourselves all the way up to the Super Shogun Stormtrooper. And what had happened there was we'd been making vinyl and all the stuff, and we were building up. And when we made the second iteration of the store, we wanted to make it like, what's the ultimate store? And one of the jokes is like, you always live in your grandma's basement, right? That's where these toy collectors live. So we're like, we should make it feel like, we made the joke like, oh, it's going to feel like you're living in your grandma's basement. Grandma's house would have flock Victorian wallpaper on it, right?
Sure.
So we did that, but it was a memorial pattern of all the dead characters in Star Wars. And then we got it made, actually got the wallpaper made. So when you walk into the store, it was this flock Victorian wallpaper, but when you looked at it, it was like, no, that's a snow trooper, and that's Darth Vader, and that's Boba Fett. And, it's like, oh no, they're all these dead characters from Star Wars. Long story short, my friend Shane Turgeon came to town. He's like, oh, you should show this to my friend Steve. His friend Steve, of course, is fucking Steve Sansweet.
Right.
You're like I'm talking to the god of Star Wars, right? Yeah. So I meet with Steve, and he's like, this is awesome. Yeah. And he calls in somebody from licensing, and it's a guy that had been doing licensing overseas for years, and he had just come back to the States. I don't think I'm supposed to use his name. That's why.
Sure.
And he was like, oh, I know what you make, because I've seen it in Japan. All the vinyl stuff. Oh. He's like, I didn't know anybody did this. He was the guy that gave Medicom their license to make Star Wars Bear Bricks.
Oh, wow.
He's like, well, I didn't know people did that. And he was like, well, what would you want to do? And of course, I start rattling off action figures. He's like, you can't do any of that shit. It has to be outside these parameters. And then I was like, all right, what about a Shogun Warrior? As a kid, I had Star Wars figures, Shoguns. I want to put my chocolate and my peanut butter together. And they were like, yeah, let's do. So we literally bet the farm. It took all the money we built up over a decade, and we bet the farm on the Stormtrooper, because I was like, when else am I going to get this chance? So the Stormtrooper took a lot longer to get out than we thought, because we're reinventing how to make Shoguns. Came out, it was successful. And so then we were like, cool, we've got our pile of money, but what do we want to make next? Obviously, we want to make Boba Fett. We want to make Darth Vader.
We've got a sidebar real quick, because I got to ask you about the Shogun, because it brings up an interesting point. A lot of times when people are doing retro style toys, and certain things that collectors may expect or want don't get done or take a while, it's because my belief is it's because when they were making Shogun Warriors back in the late 70s, early 80s, whatever, the processes were different. The requirements were different. You can't make the same toy that was being made then. You have to figure out a new way to do it with modern production. Is that kind of right?
Half and half.
Okay.
Half of it was like, if you think about the 70s, they made a lot of shit out of blow mold. because it was like a new technology they'd really refined. So your big wheel was made out of blow mold.
Right.
Like they were making blow mold everything. But people realized very quickly there is very low QC tolerance on blow mold. The molds are abhorrently expensive because you've got to be, it's blowing air at this crazy pressure to move the plastic outside while being heated up. It's this whole thing. And like, there's literally like 10 different things where they adjust, like it can blow at this rate here, but it needs to be lesser rate here and all this to make it work.
Oh gosh.
It's crazy. So like blow molding, the only thing they make out of blow mold anymore is Halloween buckets and duck decoys. Literally the factory that made that Stormtrooper makes duck decoys the rest of the year because it's not an efficient manufacturing process. People moved on from that to injection. So having to go back and say, I want to make this in blow mold, you're starting from scratch all over again. Like you want high tolerance on this, it's blow mold. You want high tolerance, go injection.
Right.
Like,
and if you
can't be injection. And then they're like, all right, well, if we make it out of not polypropylene, if we make it out of PVC, you can paint it. But it's like, it can't be PVC. It's got to be PE. It's got to be polyethylene because that's what the old ones were made of.
Right.
And that's what it feels like. Well, you can't paint PE. So how do you deal with the black that's on a Stormtrooper? And that's why they're injected parts, because we can't make the stickers that fine. And, you get into this whole thing.
Yeah.
Where, anyways, so coming back, what we said was like, we've got, if we make Boba Fett next, which is what the plan was, it's going to take 2 years. And I was like, 2 years. Like, this is crazy. I was like, what else have I always wanted? And then it came back. I was like, those alien figures from the cover of Tomards. And we're like, could we do that? I don't know. We just made a Star Wars toy. Maybe we could do that. And no one was licensing Alien. It was dead. Yeah. So we were able to go get the license for Alien because they were like, you want Alien? Nobody wants Alien. We're like, yeah, we want Alien. And, and we had to put 100% of the guarantee down in advance because we don't know you. You could be out of business in 3 weeks, right? And to be fair, we did not believe that there was going to be a lot of market for it. You had to be really educated to know that those things even existed. So I'm going to go to San Diego Comic-Con with low likeness, low articulation, low paint apps, high price point on a really obscure thing. So we went to San Diego with the reaction figure prototypes, for Alien, not thinking, we're talking to the nerdiest of the nerds here. And we just didn't realize that there was a whole generation of people like me that while you buy new toys, also had that nostalgia for that old look, that thing that made them feel like a kid again. Like I appreciate the sophistication of this new toy and I love it, but I also want this really simplified, it sounds like I'm denigrating it, but I'm not. Like this simple, thicker, clunkier expression on card that just all of a sudden I'm 8 again. Yeah. And that was they're sort of like, that is the turning point for Super 7.
Well, and at that point, I mean, with the success, because you're not only going up against the fact, potentially at the time that people weren't aware that those, prototypes existed in the first place, but also that at the time, retro toys in that way weren't,
Didn't
now.
exist.
No, we've been seeing, back when Funko had the reaction line, and since then we've been seeing this stuff in stores for a long time.
To be fair, that Funko thing, that was a production and distribution deal, like literally that happened at that San Diego.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
They had been our booth neighbor for years.
Okay.
And that was right when Mariotti took over ownership from Becker. And right when they were starting to become Funko. But I mean, at that point, they were still a very small company. Very small. And we realized very quickly that the opportunity was larger. The opportunity for the future was larger than we could handle.
Right.
And they were our booth neighbors. They weren't the Funko that we know today.
Right, right.
We're like, hey, we need help with this. You guys are growing. Can you help us? And they're like, sure. Like, and so in that regard, it was like, oh, we literally did a handshake deal at San Diego for them to help us do production and distribution. Like, we would design, they would produce and distribute.
Oh, that's amazing.
And that's how sort of like the first 3 years of Reaction happened. During that course, their business became so big that all of a sudden Reaction was a hindrance to them. And that's when we took it back. And, but at that time they were very small, and it was helpful. So when people go like, oh, didn't Funko own it? It was like, no, Funko was our production and distribution, but they were great partners for us for a couple of years. They allowed us to get so much more out the door than we could have financed ourselves.
And I'll always treasure that era because I ended up with figures from my favorite movie, Big Trouble in Little China.
Yep.
That to this day is still an underserved license, in my opinion.
Yes, I would agree.
So at some point in the future, I'd love to have you back on to connect from that era to now. But we've got some big stuff we got to talk about before you go. Okay, so I got a couple of things I want to cover.
Okay.
I've got some visual aids here.
Oh, okay.
Because, and now I'm not looking for any confirmation of anything that's to come. I just want to throw a couple of ideas. Old Dave here has a couple of licenses that he'd love to see handled by Super 7.
Okay.
So I'm just going to throw a couple of images up. See what you think. Lady Gaga.
I think it would be very difficult just knowing the state of licensing for anybody that's actually still very much in the height of the public.
Really?
Yeah. What you run into is, you know, I won't use any names or whatever.
Sure.
But like, when you talk to some of the people that are still really relevant, they're like, look, our star, if you will, only has so much time for whatever you want to call it, creating music, creating content, doing everything else.
Right.
So if they're going to have a partnership, it's got to be meaningful. And usually what meaningful means is minimum $1 million.
Right.
And I'm not saying that in a negative way. The reality is, like, I am sure right now, if Lady Gaga wanted to, she could license any product in the world by anyone.
Yeah.
And so while we all think it's cool, and I would actually think that there's a lot of looks that she has that would translate really well.
Yes.
I have not asked particularly, but I've asked about many other people within this sphere of influence.
Yeah.
And the answer is just simply like, for the time ingested, unless they're personally interested, anything like time you see some sort of weird small thing happening with somebody of that stature, it's because they're personally interested in it.
Right. Okay, well, that actually provides a pretty good segue.
Think about Kid Cudi and Star Trek.
Right. Yeah.
It's not because Star Trek thought Kid Cudi was going to be this great transitional thing.
Right.
He pushed the issue and said, hey, Star Trek, I want to do something. And they're like, oh, we can get that? Come on in.
That makes sense. Well, that's a good segue then to the next one. I've only got a few of these, a small amount.
Yeah. Prince. We have been trying since before he died.
Oh man, that Ultimates, reactions, everything would be.
There's so many looks. There's so many things. Yeah.
All right. You remember these guys?
I do.
Shirt tails, 80s cartoons, Saturday morning.
I remember Digger and Bogey. I don't even really, the girl Panda. I don't remember. But I do remember them, but I haven't thought about them in forever. I've completely, I don't know.
I just adored this cartoon when I was a kid. And then Hardee's did a series of plushes that you had to go buy, a chicken biscuit or whatever, and then you could get a Shirt Tails little plush. But there were the typical stickers and everything else that they did back then. But reaction figures of these guys, I think, would be fantastic. I would be tremendous.
Yeah, wow. All right. Usually pretty much everything anybody throws up, I'm like, we've been there. This is what you have officially won lotto for today. Of like, I had not even thought about this in forever.
All right. Well, I've got one more,
Because
and
Digger was like shy, but Bogey would just make sort of noises. I thought.
he was supposed to be, his voice was Humphrey Bogart, basically.
Ah.
And yeah, it was just a fun little show. They
Like
solved
Tigger's
mysteries.
supposed to
They
be
did
the
their thing.
hero, isn't he?
I
The
think
tiger.
I think Rick the raccoon was kind of the leader, main guy.
But Digger and Bogey were definitely the coolest there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So my one more is something that, well, you've already mentioned. So there we go.
We've talked about this offline, I think. Then haven't we?
No, I have
talked
not.
to
But
somebody
I'm
about it
sure
at
it's been
Joe
brought up a
Fed.
lot.
I cannot comment around this license because there's
Understood.
many different conversations around it, and my take on what it is different than somebody else's take, and probably
Okay.
different from another person. But especially with Inhumanoids, like those are the three characters within Inhumanoids.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Picturing those from Super 7, I'm picturing like the Super Cyborgs or possibly even the larger ones, but I just obviously that's perfect and it's come up before, so you know that.
I
All right.
am keenly aware of Inhumanoids.
Then
let me rephrase it. If for some of these old licenses, if they aren't out there in some way, there's usually some sort of problem with them,
right.
Meaning confusion around ownership and trademarks and who owns what and do these people own all this different stuff. That's usually why you don't see stuff like that. That's why Mad Max isn't out there. Like
right.
You're like, or that's not why Mad Max is more that the director doesn't want it. But Blade Runner is the perfect example. You've got three different owners. They all hate each other and none of them will approve anything anybody else wants to do. That's why nothing gets made.
And Friday the 13th is another good example where the writer and the director had issues for the longest time of Jason versus Friday the 13th. All right. Well, we're going to, in just a minute here, we're going to take a quick break, but I want an expert opinion on one of my pet peeves.
Okay.
It drives me crazy. And you feel free to tell me I'm wrong and stupid. It drives me crazy when people say things like 6-inch scale, 3 3/4 inch scale, because to me that's not a scale, that's a size.
You are technically correct, but I think we're all trained to say scale because the old figures all said that.
Right.
In the 70s and 80s, it all said, well, this vehicle is scaled to fit your 3 3/4 figures. It's not a scale according to life size. It's not saying it is a 16th inch scale,
right,
or 1 to 16 inch scale. It's instead saying that the format is 6 inches and everything is scaled to fit it. So technically, both can be correct.
What
do you think of that?
I think that's exactly right. Well, and it gets into one of those things where it's like if it's what most people say and you recognize what they mean when they say it, then it's correct. Don't be pedantic, which is my problem.
Well, people are also, you'll hear people now say that 3 3/4 is 1/18.
And it's not.
And it's not. And that's why I'm like, it's not. And the reality is we all say 3 3/4, but pretty much every figure is actually 4 inches.
They're 4 inches, right.
So yeah.
I need to just not be picky.
Yeah, well, we've all got a thing that sticks in our craw for one reason or another.
Right.
That is, and it is what it is.
Well, we are going to take a little break right now for our commercial sponsors. I don't know.
Yes.
But Brian, thank you very much, and we'll
see you in just a few.
That's right.
Oh, it sure is a beautiful day for a walk, isn't it, Pee-wee? You bet it is, Godzilla. Oh no, it's Zombeef and Robot Reaper.
You two are doomed. Yeah, doomed.
Oh!
Look, it's Old Blind Man.
That's right. Hop in, boys. We're getting out of here.
Come on, G, let's go.
They're getting away. Curse you, old blind man.
Thanks, creature from the Black Lagoon. Find the newest Super 7 toys at a store near you. Super 7, what's your adventure? And we are back with Brian Flynn from Super 7. We established that scale, just whatever, call it whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. We're all here to have fun. You guys have absolutely lost your minds over there at Super 7 because you have dropped
In a
San
good
Diego
way?
in
I
a
hope.
great way.
In a
Okay,
great way.
so Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. My very briefly, my toy history was Mego, Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then after Turtles, I kind of considered that when I became more of a collector, if you
Right.
will. So Ninja Turtles are a massive part of my foundation. I didn't, though, get the Turtle van from you guys. I've got all the other Ultimates, but the van, it was I had to make decisions, you know?
Yeah, look, you ain't gotta justify it to me.
But now, you guys, what are you doing?
The world's
This
most
is-
ridiculous repaint.
This is incredible. And as much as I was able to resist the standard release, because, you know, I've had Turtle vans. I know what the Turtle van looks like. Cool, great, whatever. This is unbelievable.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Where did this come? Who said, all right, guys, I've got this idea.
No. This was my harebrained idea.
Okay.
You know, so you know, with Turtles, obviously, there's part of it where you're like, how has there never, you know, our pop-up is a Turtles pizzeria. You're like, how has anyone never done a Turtles pizzeria? It makes no sense, right? You're like these things go together. Like, how have we not done this? So we started putting together the whole idea around Mikey's Pizzeria and what it would be, how we execute it. We're like, you don't build this. You go to an existing pizzeria and you just redo it, you know? And so we'll actually have pizza. Like, you can get pizza at Mikey's Pizzeria. You know, and we were building out the whole thing. And then there was this discussion around, well, what would you do for delivery? And it's like, oh, well, you know, you'd have a delivery van or a delivery vehicle, right? In most cases, like, and we're like, wait a minute, the delivery van would be the Turtle van. But what if it was like fully like a delivery van? Like, what would you do? Because we talked about possibly putting one outside and you would vinyl wrap it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And then you're like, you know, that's expensive. It's kind of, and then we're like, well, if you are going to go down that realm of thinking, wrapping it and doing whatever, like, what would you do to the Turtle van? And then once this got colored up by the team, like, I came up with the idea of it, but they colored it up. Once they colored it up, because we were very like, you know, this is going to be a really fucking expensive.
Well,
recolor,
right. This is a niche of a niche here.
Beyond that, I'm like, you know, I don't know if anyone's going to go for this. Then they colored it up, and we're like, I think I'm in love.
It's gorgeous.
Like, we have to do this. Like, we have to. It's so absolutely preposterous that we have to do this. So that's really where it sort of came from. It was an extension of Mikey's Pizzeria to like, what was his delivery vehicle be? And then we have a van. Let's see what it would look like. And then once we did that, then we're like, oh, it's on now. Like, we got to do this.
This is just a bold move, and I absolutely love it.
It's completely off the reservation.
Yes, and
I
love that.
And to be fair, going into this, we were like, people are either going to absolutely love it or they're going to hate it and just be like, what kind of an asshole makes this expensive of a repaint? Screw you guys. Like, I have no idea which way this is going to go because I love everything.
Well, and that's I don't know. It's expressions of insane creativity are I mean, that's what toys really should be all about. So
Yes.
this is fantastic. And what I've done is I've picked just a few because you guys have so much stuff. I highly recommend everybody check out your social media to see everything San Diego Comic-Con related. But I picked out a few choice items to discuss here and kind of talk about. Next up,
Oh yeah.
So now
This is in San
these are
Diego.
not Comic-Con, but they've been announced recently alongside the Comic-Con stuff.
So this is wave one of Sesame Street Blind Box. So what we've really seen, is that obviously there's the carded traditional toy collector, which we all are, but there's also a group of people that buy toys that aren't sort of like hung up on that vernacular, and they buy toys in a different way. And Blind Box is really, really popular for that person. So this is a recolor sort of wave. In some ways, it's not really. Like Bert and Ernie are pretty much standard. Same thing with Oscar, but there are chase figures within it. And it's just a way for other people to get into wave one of Sesame Street. And so then the chase figures that come with it is you've got the orange Oscar. So when he first showed up, he was orange. Then he turned green, and that's the Oscar we all know and love. And then we've got the translucent cookie monster with the cookies that rattle around in his belly.
Fantastic. And here is why I love the blind box stuff, because I've got a number of the Godzillas over there. I like the blind box stuff because when I buy a reaction figure, we talked about it before, to me, that's the piece of art. There are some that I have opened, but like the card back is, I got them on the wall. That's the display. With the blind box figures, you don't have that problem of, oh, I don't want to ruin this presentation. This to me, these are more
it's about
toys.
fun. It's so much fun to rip these open and see which ones you get, and then you're holding and playing with them. There's no preciousness to the packaging, all that other stuff.
And that's every time I go into Target. And now, are these going to be in Target?
They will be in Target.
Okay. Every time I go into Target and I see a new Super 7 like blind box case, I'm like, oh, here we go. It's time again.
Yeah.
All right. So we already know the Dungeons and Dragons Ultimates based on the cartoons, which more on that in a minute, are on the way. But this is something completely different that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, I mean, our pop-up at San Diego is the 50 years of Dungeons and Dragons. So we're doing everything from the very beginning to today. There'll be product for the entirety of it. Like most of the time when people sort of think about stuff, they'll be like, oh, you're just playing in a retro space. No, that pop-up is very much about all eras of D&D. In as much, we've done, the animated D&D figures are on pre-order, and those are in process right now. But what are we doing for that person that's into D&D today? Right. So that was really where the Vecna idea came from, was like, let's have Ultimates from the past and Ultimates from the present. And so this is the beginning of Vecna.
And of course, the tie-in with the name being used in Stranger Things and the D&D tie-in is very strong marketing. I love it when Ultimates can be two things. I love the fact that there are toy and cartoon Thundercats, which, by the way, shout out to, I cannot remember his name. We want Thundercats.
Eggman.
Shout out to him. He is fantastic. His enthusiasm,
off the charts.
I love watching his videos.
But I mean, that's a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier. Eggman is in South Africa. Like, the person that is, you'd be like, oh, Thundercats, it's this giant American community. One of the guys, there's many, but one of the guys sitting at the forefront doing the most work is in South Africa. Like, this is not about just the American version of things. It's about the worldwide version of things. So anyways, but back to it. But yeah, Eggman's great. His energy and enthusiasm is so palpable.
And his relentlessness.
Oh, no. Trust me. Wait till the camera goes off. All right, what can you tell me about this? Here we go.
He's great. I love it. So yeah, Vecna looking awesome. Cannot wait to see what else is in store for both versions of D&D Ultimates going forward. Also, in a D&D vein, glow in the dark and translucent are my two biggest toy gimmick weak spots.
Yes.
And the fact that you guys, I didn't realize this at first until I sat down and read the description. The fact that the card backs go together to form a dungeon map. Who designed that?
That is Sarah, who works for us. She did those. and she is very passionate about D&D. We'll just put it that way.
Oh, cool.
Sarah's absolutely wonderful. But yeah, and the card backs are screened as well, so parts of them glow in the dark. So the yellow on the card back all glows as well. So I think if you look at this, they're not lined up properly, but if you look at the sorceress to the top left, you can see the tunnel going out, and that tunnel goes into the Gith Yankees area. Like she did a wonderful, wonderful job. The whole team did. I don't want to single a single person out. Like there's a lot of people involved in making this happen. Like if we're talking about 2D, you've got there's I'm not going to go rattle through everybody, but they've done a really, really good job on this stuff. And it's super fun. It's super fun. And if you know Super 7 and you know me, I'll glow in the dark anything you let me.
Well, now I'll buy it too. And that's I love it when you guys do things that are a presentation as a set, like when you've done the Valentine's Day figures in the past with the heart, and I love that kind of stuff where the view is, look at this collection.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Okay. The next one is the big one. This is, ever since D&D toys started being a thing again, this has been, me and Christian have talked about some form of big toy Tiamat for years.
And there is a vintage Tiamat toy,
yes,
but it's not, the scale isn't there. This was a really difficult and long, arduous process for us on this one, simply because, same thing, I'll phrase it this way. We know people like Tiamat, but unless you're deep into D&D, you have no fucking idea who this is.
Right.
So the size of the audience is not that huge. So how do you pull this off and make it something that can work? Not indifferent to the Turtle Van or Snake Mountain or Cat's Lair or the Mothership, big expensive toys of this scale, simply the cost to make the molds and do it is near impossible. Like it's just super, super expensive. But on the flip side, if you're familiar with what we've been doing in our supersized vinyls,
oh yes,
which are, they're, the Mummy Boys are up there, but it's not, these big vinyls that we've been focused on that are really cartoon accurate. A lot of Peanuts, the Disney stuff.
The Scrooge is beautiful.
And when you see them in person, I think that's when it doesn't really convey itself on screen. But the difference is by going into vinyl, I can make lower amounts, to amortize the tooling, if that makes sense. Where
sure,
I'm not going to use real numbers because then people try to do the math and it gets all screwed up. But like, say if I'm doing injection to make it work, I have to make 100,000. Mm-hmm. But if I was doing vinyl, I could do 50,000 to overcome the tooling costs.
Right.
So when you're dealing with a character like Tiamat, there's just a smaller pool of people that are genuinely interested. And if I want to try to make this all injection, this is going to get really abhorrently expensive. And I'm not going to probably hit the numbers. Not indifferent to what happened to us with Cobra Mothership. But as we really talked about Tiamat and how he works and how he functions, we've been making vinyl for 23 years now. Like, I know what we can do and what we can pull. And especially in the case of this animation look, which is fairly smooth but very volumetric, we're like, wait a minute, we think we can pull this off in vinyl. So if we take what we've been doing in our $300 large size vinyls and apply that to ultimate scaling, I can execute Tiamat, I think, in a way that we can actually go to production with in vinyl that I couldn't do if we had to do this in injection, if that makes any sense. So what you're seeing is actually I think we've talked about it, but it's the first vinyl in ultimate scale. And then, it'll be you'll be articulated at the shoulders, on the front and back legs. It'll be articulated a couple places in the tail. The The wings will be articulated, the necks will be articulated, the heads will be articulated, but they're all going to have to be swivel joints. I can't put in like double jointed neck joints and all that
Right,
other
right.
stuff. There's limitations, but I don't think that you need that level of
No.
articulation
No.
for something like this. It's not appropriate. So I really did, when we finally landed on like, oh wait, we could make it in vinyl. It's like, no, this can actually really work, and it makes sense for what it is. And I think we can be successful here, where if we tried to make this injection, I don't think we could get the units that we need.
Decades now have been a proponent of using different formats and styles to achieve the right scale in toy lines. Like when Hasbro puts out a Giant Man figure, well, it's not the size Giant Man should be, but if they would just put it out like this, be willing to play around with the articulation and the style and the way that it's made, so that you can have, because me as a collector putting things on the shelf, and honestly, even back when I was a little kid playing with these toys, I wanted my dragons and my giants and whatever else to be massive and not necessarily be toy scale.
Right.
So this is gorgeous. And actually, you guys kind of already did this in a way with the Super Cyborg Krang that, to my eye, is compatible with the Turtles Ultimates.
I think for a lot of people, that was a unintended side consequence of like, oh yeah, that feels right. It's not.
I wondered
exactly
if it was
right.
Yeah.
It's not exactly right, but it's close, and it feels good, and it looks good on the shelf like that. Ironically, I think we started that cyborg. The Cyborg Krang, I think, was the first cyborg that we ever designed. It just didn't come out so much later. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Yeah.
and speaking of that, I have to correct something I said earlier when we were talking about Creature from the Black Lagoon. I said 21st Century Toys, and obviously I meant Sideshow Collectibles,
Yes.
not 21st Century Toys, who made soldier figures.
Yeah. No,
And since we're talking,
I knew the line that you were talking about, because when Sideshow came out with them, they came out with them in the big ones. They came out with the little tiny ones.
yes, the
They
little
came
big
out with-
heads.
Yeah.
Wrestlers, they did wrestlers.
I bought every creature that they made.
Me too.
Didn't matter what format. They did a lot of really, really great stuff.
I did not care about the Mole Man at all, but I bought a Mole Man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then
I care about the Mole Man, but that's all right.
and then this guy too, your Super Cyborg Creature, which is anybody watching this, see this in person, you will buy it. It's gorgeous.
Well, and then you can take the face off.
You can take
the face off, you can take the chest off, and you can take the arm off.
And when you take the arm off,
you get the skeleton that you see in the movie.
See, this is how, look at this. You can't even tell that this stuff is removable.
Fully articulated action.
I'm actually trying to find the
scene
right now.
The panels off. There, it's meant to be snug, but yeah, it's definitely.
Oh yeah. Look, I want it to stay on. I don't want to pop it on there and then it just falls off. I know I can get the arm off there. So there's the fossil.
Yep.
Absolutely beautiful. And then the torso. There it is. There's the seam. There he goes. Guts with
the fish.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. A little bit of humor in there.
Yeah, well, and that's what I like. I like, again, the creativity, the not taking everything so seriously. A real gill man, wouldn't have a removable chest. Like, yeah, but that's not as much fun.
No, that's nowhere near as much fun.
All right. So we've covered some of the San Diego Comic-Con stuff. Is there anything else specific about Comic-Con, since it's about 2 weeks away now, that you want to talk before we move on to our G.I. Joe segment?
No, I don't know, that I need to, or whatever. We've got a lot going on. It's going to be a lot of fun. I hope that people are excited. We've got 3 things happening. We've got the booth, which is sort of the main thrust for most everyone there. Come on down to the booth. We've got a little bit of everything represented in the booth. And then we have the D&D pop-up, which is running the length of Comic-Con. It opens up Wednesday at 7 p.m. So when the regular convention closes at 7, Comic-Con don't have to stop. come on over to our pop-up. It starts at 7 and it goes till whenever, usually till about 2 a.m. is
that's fantastic.
how long it goes. And that's really, there's a lot of really amazing stuff going on there. And then on Friday night, we have the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles pop-up. So, and that'll be at what was formerly TNT Pizza, now is Mikey's Pizza.
Beautiful. Okay, so all of the San Diego Comic-Con stuff can be seen on, of course, Super 7 social media, be available at the show and the pop-up, but then goes up online on July 29th. Is that correct?
Yeah, Monday after. So remaining inventory, all that other stuff goes up on Monday.
Very cool. All right, well, we're segueing to G.I. Joe, but we are sticking with San Diego Comic-Con.
We have a couple things.
Going back.
People are like, reaction's done. They're never going to make anything.
Well, what's interesting is this piece, which this is beautiful. I love the idea of this ash can coloration. It's great.
But it's also, it's the mechanical. It's the black and white mechanical.
Well, and it almost brings reaction, which may fuel the fire of what you just said, actually, because it almost brings reaction full circle, because one of the first releases was the full color version of this Snake Eyes.
Yes. Yeah. Michael Golden, issue 21, silent interlude. Such an amazing, and that's been one of those reaction figures that's just crossed over. So many people that may not collect the line are like, I need that one because of that issue.
I mean, it's one of the most notable, not just G.I. Joe comics, one of the most notable comics ever published.
Yep.
We have also got our special release Zartan here with his flute.
You've got the snake that comes out of the box, out of the little wicker thing with the screen on it. You've got all those secret moments of Zartan.
And that's one of the things I love about the Ultimates is all of the like episode specific stuff, the accessories that come with them, that when you were a kid, you were like, man, why can't I get the snake coming out of the basket? Why can't I get, well, we'll get to this one later. And you guys are making those episode accessories that you really wanted in your play pattern when you were a kid, and you just didn't have them, or you had to like find a penny to be, the thing that they bought Alaska with or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, with Zartan's a perfect example. Like when we made the Ultimate Zartan, it's like there's certain stuff he has to come with.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, that list gets pretty big. So all this other stuff around him that's so much fun, you don't get to, because you've got to have the core and the basics and all that stuff. So this was really one where we're like, there's so much more to be done with Zartan, but it isn't for everyone. Like if this was our base Zartan, people would be like, this isn't the Zartan I want. Right. So I've made you the base Zartan that I know that you want, but for that other person, here's the Zartan you've never had. And that's what's exciting to me. Like to me, that flute and the snake coming out of the basket, like that was such an iconic version of it. The only thing we don't have is like when he goes to the base and the snakes come out and they turn around, the 4 big video snakes at the other end. Like I can't make everything, but like I want to see him in the robe coming up to that with those things coming in, because you're still like, who is he? What's going on?
Well, and there's so much stuff that's fun about that Sunbow series. You guys will never run out of deep cuts like that. And speaking of deep cuts, this is, out of all of the toy companies, this is the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive that I immediately fell in love with. This to me is a perfect exclusive because it's a repaint that is exciting and wild, but it's not oh man, why did they make that an exclusive?
What do you mean? Why did they make that an exclusive?
Well, a lot of times people, if it's a primary character, or if it's somebody,
I see what
standard
you're saying,
version
right.
of somebody, people get upset, and I understand when, well, I'm not going to be able to, that's a key character in this toy line, and I'm not going to be able to get it. Whereas Cobra Mortal, not a key character.
No, it is exactly what we try to do. It's like when we talk about the exclusives, it's like if you're collecting the main line and the main characters, here you go. You've got everything. This is stuff where you don't necessarily need it to be complete. You know,
And yet I feel I need this to be complete.
Well, you know, like same thing. Do you need that Zartan to be complete? I have a Zartan. I don't have to have that Zartan. I have a Snake Eyes. I don't necessarily need this Snake Eyes, but more than anything, you know, and I'll say it right now, like, you know, we're making O-rings. Like, I'm not going to remake Cobra Mortal in O-ring because that exists. Yes, it costs $10,000 or whatever to get yourself a Cobra Mortal in that, but that exists, and I want to protect what's already been there.
Oh,
but I'll make it for you in reaction, and I'll make it for you in ultimate so you can have one. But I'm not going to go basically make a reproduction of this in O-ring.
Oh, and that answers a big question that we've had from our listeners. So I'm glad we got that out of the way.
Yeah, because you know you have to respect what already exists. It exists. It's rare as hell. It's expensive. A lot of people have paid a lot of money for it. Like that history, you don't need me to create more history. You don't need me to go out there. Like I understand that there's a lot of people would be like, but I just wanted that in 3 3/4, and it would be cheaper if you did it. It would be, but that diminishes what it already is to a degree. So I'm not, my plan is to not do that. Now, there's been a couple times where I said I wasn't going to do something, and then because of any number of reasons, but that the chatter was so overwhelming that finally we're like, all right, fine, we'll do it because you want it.
Are you talking about the metal Silverhawks right now?
That would be one of them. That would be one of them. But, you know, I can be convinced otherwise, but I would say that my predilection is to preserve that what is so awesome and special about if Cobra Mortal was easy to get and you could buy it for $10 because they made 100,000 of them down south, I don't know that it would have the mystique that it has.
Sure.
You know, people would be just like, yeah, that's a really weird, uneven. I mean, I guess it's kind of cool, but it's not really Snake Eyes. But because it is so rare and because you can't get one, that's what makes you appreciate it so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. I can 100% respect that. And now, as much as I wanted to see a lot of the international O-rings redone by you guys, I see that point of view now, and as a collector, I respect that.
You know,
that's actually very cool.
Well, I mean, we talked about Kenner Aliens earlier, but that was one of those things when we were making them. A couple of people were very helpful with us getting that line made, but there were a couple of people that was like, I don't want you to make this because it's going to ruin the value of what I have.
Yeah, right.
And ultimately, we changed something on every piece and part so that you can tell ours from the vintage ones. There's variance in there. There's a change in sculpt. You can't pass off our test shot of ours as a vintage Kenner test shot. But, you know, those are special. So they should continue to be special.
So the Reaction Plus, the Super 7 O-rings are going to be things that have not been done before, in which when people say, oh, what, so they're not going to make Duke and Snake Eyes? Well, obviously there are lots of different ways to make Duke and Snake Eyes.
There's lots of ways to make Duke and Snake Eyes that you haven't had yet.
Yes, 100%. Yes. And then, of course, on the list of things that haven't been done before.
No comment.
I'm just putting it out there.
No comment.
I was fortunate enough to see the unpainted prototypes, I believe is what you had at Joe Fest.
Unpainted test shots.
Unpainted test shots. Absolutely gorgeous. And you told me something there that I'm going to repeat here because I asked about the fact that they were on stands. You said that the peg holes on the Reaction Plus figures are going to be compatible with the vintage toys.
They will be 3.5 millimeter to match the vintage toy. That's why they were loose on the Reaction stands, because the Reaction stands are 3 millimeter, like action figures. So yes, they are compatible. They are backwards compatible to all things G.I. Joe. They are not backwards compatible to all Reaction and action figure stands because those are slightly smaller pegs.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's well, and that I mean, even within the Real American Hero line, there are little minor variances. You know, some figures fit on those battle stands a little better than others. Just you know, it's a toy thing.
Yeah, you'll be able to take these figures and put them and stand them up in your his tank.
That's beautiful. So with this line going forward, we've talked about reaction a little bit, and I honestly don't know if you've discussed this or not. Is reaction going to be continuing?
Yeah, it'll continue. Good. I mean, there's one at San Diego this year.
Oh, right.
It won't continue maybe at the pace that it has been. Obviously, the pace, like the way I'll explain it to you this way is, you know, every quarter you'd be able to walk into Target and there'd be a new set of reaction figures. That'll become O-ring. You can walk into Target and buy the O-ring. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop making reaction. We just won't be making them at the same pace. It'll slow down some, but we will still be making new characters in O-ring. I mean, in reaction.
Well, and that answered another question about the pacing of the O-rings.
Yeah. You know, within that, there's only so much, you know, I always try to be cognizant about how much product you're putting out there and how much people have to spend to stay complete. Yeah. So if I'm setting reaction plus, you know, on a regular basis, I can't have just as much coming out from reaction because then it's just too much stuff.
Yeah.
So one of those things has to give. So reaction, I mean, we've made a lot of reaction figures.
Yeah, I was just going through them earlier and I didn't realize.
I think it's like 72 different sculpts, not variants, sculpts.
Right.
So it's like, all right, we can pull, you know, pump the brakes a little bit, slow down and do a few here and there, and then let O-ring really drive for a while. But it's not going to go away.
Maybe do a blind box set. I don't know.
You know, there's all sorts of options out there. The world is our oyster.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Oysters are terrible, by the way.
The world is your gigantic man-eating oyster.
Oh, there we go. It's going to get, that's when Scarlet and Destro are underneath in their scuba suits.
Oh, on that. Yeah. Well, okay. So they're the tube worms.
Yep.
Which I've been calling for toys of the tube worms forever. There's the actual giant oyster that they stick Cobra Commander in the movie.
Yep.
And then kind of going back to the Destro thing, there's the giant Lovecraftian monster that lives under Destro's castle, which...
Well, there's also the clam that has the glowing pearl in it. Am I confusing that one?
No, now I'm trying to think back.
Because doesn't it catch onto one of their fins?
There is no doubt. I'm 100% positive you're right. Because every creepy underwater thing that could happen happened in that. Oh, speaking of that specific episode, that again a lot of convenient segues here tonight. Vehicles. I think there's probably a lot of interest in vehicles, although there has been some evidence to the contrary in the past.
There has been some evidence to the contrary in the past. I think vehicles are going to be a very tricky spot simply because most everything has been made.
Right.
Like there's very few stones left unturned, which is why we ended up with the mothership as one of our options. So I will not be reproducing any old vehicles. I will not be kind of going back on that because one, they already exist.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you want those, you can go get those. You know, sometimes when we get into a line, people are like, can you remake this so I can get it cheaper? Well, that's not really my job either.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That sounds a little weird, but it's not my job to save you $10. My job is to create new toys and get things that are exciting. You know, there's one or two vehicles that we're still looking at that might have some legs, but generally speaking, and G.I. Joe to a degree is a little bit of an exception, but generally speaking, people like if 10 people collect, only one of those 10 people buys a vehicle because they take up a lot of space and they're expensive. So making vehicles is generally speaking a difficult and losing money proposition.
Well, and I think it's also difficult to difficult for collectors to grasp, and I'm not trying to sound like Mr. Smarty Pants because I don't grasp it either, but I do think it's difficult for collectors to grasp just how expensive it is to develop a vehicle.
Yeah, a vehicle is like making, just when you get into tooling costs, it's 20 times what it costs to make a figure. Like I can make 20 Reaction Plus figures, or I can make one vehicle.
Yeah.
Like it's ridiculous, the difference. And then you go, okay, well, it's 20 times more expensive, but 1/10 the customer level buys it. So that means it's actually 200 times more expensive.
Yeah.
So to cross that threshold, you either need to sell shitloads of volume, or it's got to be really expensive. The more expensive it is, the more people fall off. And the reality is you can't hit volume. And somebody would be like, look at the Sky Striker. Sky Striker is probably, in terms of, G.I. Joe, one of the most successful vehicles that they made. The classified series, his tank, I think, did better than that, but the Sky Striker did really well. But that's also one where you're like, how many of those people were buying a Sky Striker to get the 7 figures,
right,
versus the Sky Striker itself? If that Sky Striker didn't come with any figures, would it have crossed that same threshold? And I don't know that it would have. And I'm not saying that to disparage it. Let me be very clear. Like, I would love to look at that, and I did, and go, man, they sold 17,000 Sky Strikers. We should be able to get there with Cobra Mothership, because our number is far lower than that.
Right.
But we couldn't. And is that the strength of the Sky Striker? Is that the strength of the figures included? Is that just the time? Like they did that in the ramp through COVID when collecting was really going crazy, and when we offered it was at the very bottom of the wave.
Well, and so much other stuff.
And there's so much other stuff that goes with it, I just don't know. But generally speaking, like even a smaller vehicles, the quantity is so much less that for me to make it, they're still going to be hundreds of dollars. They're like, they made these vehicles for $50. It's like, yeah, if it's on shelf at Target and Walmart,
right,
and you've got 2,000 Target doors and 4,000 Walmart doors, like I'm just saying, like you do that, and each store gets only six one time,
right?
You're still talking about 36,000 units. Like, and the reality is that stuff comes more than once. So those numbers are not what we're doing.
Right.
What we're doing is radically different than that. And I think that that's really the disconnect, is that there's always this comparison to what's on shelf in the toy aisle. And what's on shelf in the toy aisle is radically different than what's on shelf at that collector back wall. These numbers are not the same. And there's a reason why these numbers took over some space from DVDs, but can't make it to that front of the store. Like, because if they could, they'd make more room up there, and they can't.
And that's always going to be, the conversation around toy sales has revolved around your casual buyer or whatever for so long, and there's just you have to have the casual buyer. Recently, we found out maybe not as important as it used to be, but still,
I find that whole report that everybody's like, "See, I told you we were the biggest market," all skewed. That's people buying $600 Lego sets, and they're looking at the gross dollar. That is not the guy buying action figures that is shifting that. I can tell you 100% as the person buying and making and selling it. It is not the case.
And I think a lot of it has to do with visibility too. Like we were talking about, people's resistance to certain things, vehicles, whatever. When you look at something like the Mothership, at the end of the day, obviously you've got more information than anybody about it, but all you really know for sure is the 5 extremely loud people online why they didn't buy it. Everybody else has just a multitude of reasons, why they did, which by the way, I did back it. I was super stoked about it. But you're just never going to know every little factor that's going to affect something like that. You just can't.
I can tell you with great confidence that any expensive vehicle is already a very difficult conversation. Before you get, doesn't matter how popular your line is. I mean, if you walk into the toy section right now for what is being offered right now to kids, how many vehicles are on the shelf?
Yeah. It's
There's
I
not,
remember
not very many is the answer.
I stayed well, I'm still actively collecting Star Wars, and I remember when Hasbro made the switch from the big nice starfighters, like for $25 or whatever it was, I don't know, and then they shrank things down and started making these toy size Boba Fett starship and X-wing, and they really said, okay, these are toys now. We're not even attempting to appeal to a collector base, which I bought those too because they're great toys. But that's when vehicles essentially died in the toy aisle. They stopped moving because I think they became too expensive for that casual walk through the aisle person.
They're expensive. They take up a lot of space. It's no different, And then for them, they're looking at what's the churn, and how much money are we making
Right.
here? Vehicles are slow moving things. Vehicles are always tricky. G.I. Joe is the one place more than any other where the vehicles are integral to the story in much more of a way than other lines. But there's no other toy line that has anywhere near as many vehicles as G.I. Joe.
And certainly not as good of vehicles.
You have G.I. Joe, then you have Star Wars, and then in terms of actual vehicles, then you probably have Micronauts. But that's all Microman. And then it's a cliff that you drop off of till you get to the next line where they had three. Buck Rogers, you could get a Draconian Marauder and you could get Buck Rogers' spaceship. You would have one or two key vehicles in a line, and that would be it.
Well, even Masters of the Universe, that was very expansive around the time of G.I. Joe, and has beasts and vehicles, but just doesn't have anywhere near what Joe had.
No, you have Castle Grayskull, you have Snake Mountain, and then you have like Road Rippers, or you have there's a couple kind of early vehicles when there wasn't a lot with the line, and then there's kind of there's some other ones, but nobody cares.
Right. It gets later on, and it's there. Nothing is as iconic as the Joes. So, continuing with G.I. Joe, we know we've got another wave of Ultimates coming soon.
I don't know
August?
about soon, but we've got another wave coming.
Oh, okay.
What I keep saying is we're really sort of looking at that line as transitioning to more of an in-stock line.
Mm-hmm.
What we found, I talked to so many people at Joe Fest. I feel like I've said this story 100 times.
Sure.
Is that it started off pretty good with pre-orders, and then it tapered off surprisingly pretty quickly. But then when we have once they come in stock, the demand shoots through the roof. Yeah. And that may be because most people buying classified or buying a similar scale, they're buying in stock. There's a general trend across the whole thing where people don't want to do pre-orders. Yeah. For whatever reason, it slowed down. We saw, and then some of the things not even fun. We saw the DIC figures that we made.
Man, I wanted those so bad.
But then we had that opportunity at Walmart where another product dropped out and they needed space fillers. We filled it in with G.I. Joe.
Okay.
So it wasn't a dedicated space for G.I. Joe. It wasn't a thing like, look, didn't sell. That's why it's not back in stock. It's like, no, something dropped out. They needed something. We had something. We filled it in. They sold really well. So we know that the product will sell when it's in stock. Now, we're still growing into all this stuff. I can't afford to have everything be in stock.
Yeah.
So what we're really looking at is like, okay, G.I. Joe definitely seems to be an in-stock product rather than a pre-order product. Where my Thundercats customer, who's been buying with me basically since Motu, is into the cadence. They understand they're there. I put up a Thundercats pre-order. Everything is fine. So in as much, our pre-orders are about a year out from when they actually do it. We do it. How many got ordered? We go then start to make it and deliver the product, and it takes a year to develop it. So we're working on more stuff for G.I. Joe, but the gap is then a year to get to it before we have an in-stock product ready for you.
I have always liked Super 7, and then Mezco does a similar thing with their 112 collective figures. I've always liked the Go ahead and pay for the thing, and when we have it just right, we'll send it to you. Like, I like that model. I prefer that model over the, tell us you want this and then you can pay for it 6 months, a year from now or whatever. I'd rather go ahead and just do it.
Well, I mean, not everybody can afford to do that. Let's be
Sure.
fair. I think the thing for us in the beginning when we started this thing was, we were growing. We're still growing. And I can't afford to put that money on ice for a year.
Right.
So if you all really want this, we're going to go in halvesies here, if you will.
Yeah.
You guys are going to pay for some of it. And we're going to pay for some of it. And we're going to get this thing done. It did a wonderful thing for the early years of Ultimate. So if you go back, especially looking at some of the Masters and some of the older ones, which was we were able to perfectly capture the demand, which is I didn't make one piece too few or one piece too many. Now, invariably, other people catch on to it later, and then they're screwed because the only way you can get that toy now is to literally buy it out of somebody's collection.
Right.
So, but for everybody that wanted it, I never made too many. You never had to worry about it going on clearance. You never had to worry about it. So then what happened especially as we swung into COVID is third-party retailers. We won't name them, but everybody knows who they are. They're wonderful, wonderful partners of ours. They were like, wait a minute, you guys are leaving a shitload of demand on the table.
Right.
So we're going to buy the extras so that we have the inventory to sell. And that's worked really, really well for them. Really well. And but in the case of these figures, once again, using fake numbers, if you make 10,000 pieces, but there's only 9,000 people looking for them, that extra 1,000 will not sell no matter what price you put it at.
Right.
Doesn't matter because there's no one left. And so you saw this thing where it's like we over-ordered and we blew out. We over-ordered a bunch more and we blew out. We over-ordered a bunch more again. Every bit that we over-ordered of that 3X did not sell and is now sitting. And then you have this whole group of people who are like, I'll wait till it goes on clearance.
I know.
I'm not willing to buy it because all their shit goes on to clearance because nobody wants it. It's not that nobody wants it. It's not that it's bad. It's not that. It's just the projections got ahead of the actual consumer demand. Vice versa, then what you saw was this radical reshift of all the stuff that's been shipping the earlier part of this year where it shows up and they're like, where is it? It's 100% sold out. And I don't want to pay $200 on the secondary market. I was waiting for it to go on clearance. Well, you didn't order it.
Right.
So it's gone, and
Wiley Cat.
I don't want to make it hard and expensive for people, but what's that fine line? And then as we have gotten bigger, we're starting to be like, all right, are there times and places where we can make projections and bring something in stock so that people can buy it? But, it's really tricky. Same thing. If it's 10,000 pieces, just random number. No one is. Somebody's going to do the math and say he's actually telling us what to run it. Like I'm not. None of these numbers are real. They're just round. If I make 10,000 and the demand is 11,000, somebody's going to complain that we didn't make enough and it sucks and it's worth $200 on the secondary market. But if I make 10,000 and 9,000 people want it, everything sucks. They made too many. Nobody wants this shit. It's on clearance. Why did I pay full price? Like there's no winning that.
No,
so
there's
the
not.
Pre-order model for us worked amazing because we knew exactly how many to make. But we were the only people doing it for like 6 years.
Yeah.
Then everybody started doing pre-orders. And then everybody was like, I can't spend this much money for something I'm not going to get from a year. Everybody quit doing pre-orders. Then the numbers holistically come down. And then you run into things just like G.I. Joe with the DIC figures where they're like, the commentary, if you go back and look, like orders were okay, but not enough for us to get it off the ground.
Yeah.
But literally half the commentary, and granted, most of, half the time it's just trolls online anyway, because most of the time, if somebody likes something, they go, boop, and they hit the like button or
Right.
go, wow, that's rad. Screenshot, save it to my folder, whatever. They don't feel the need to comment.
Mhm.
But those people that don't, but they're like, well, I'll wait for these to go on clearance. I'll wait for these to go on clearance. Not only are they not going to go on clearance, they're not going to get made.
Well, and that's why it's another reason why I like that pre-order system is because it's the most fair system. Pre-order opens up for what, a month or whatever it
month.
is. If you want it, you get it. There's no limit. You can order 50 of them if you want to.
And quite frankly, yes, if you buy it from me, which I would prefer, you buy it from me, yes, you have to pay for it in advance. But there's other places online you can go where they will not charge you that deposit. You can still place your order.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
You know, so it's not about even, well, I don't have the money this month.
Right.
Like, you can still go to some other places and find that. But, you know, I've said the same thing. Like, I realize we talked at Joe Fest, but there's so many people I talked to Joe Fest. I'm like, you guys I don't think anyone really understands in this toy industry. There are not as many people as you think there are buying this stuff. It's because your social feed, the places you go to online, the people you have met, everybody you know is talking about G.I. Joe. I'm in a fan group with 3,000 other people. That's great. Walk outside the door of your house today. Walk to the restaurant, walk to the mall, walk wherever you want. Tell me, at your job even, is there a single other person that you run into in your entire day that collects toys? And the answer is no. There are nowhere near as many of us as people think there are. And that's the other sort of thing. They're like, why can't we have all this? And it's like, I would love to tell you, but the realization that you guys need to come to at some point, and now it sounds like I'm yelling. I don't mean to be. It's just like, there's not that many of you, and we're doing amazing things. Like, all of these toy companies are making the best product that's ever been made, ever in the history of toys, at an incredibly affordable price. If you go back to how much you paid for a G.I. Joe in 1982, and you adjust that price for inflation, I guarantee you it is a lot. Somebody go calculate that is more than you're paying right now for a classified figure. Like, this stuff was more expensive. Right now, you can get, think about it. What it would cost, the equivalent of buying a 3 3/4 O-ring figure now versus what some of the other stuff you can buy. Like, the stuff you're able to get now for the prices is bonkers. Bonkers. And it's not just us, it's everybody. You're getting fucking amazing toys, and somebody will complain that this is $29 or $39. You know what? If this would have come out in the 80s, that would have been $125. Like, all right. And rant. Whee!
Well, no, but I see, because I get frustrated by these things just as a collector that's, seeing these things on the sideline. So I imagine dealing directly with it on a day-to-day basis, that rant needs to come out from time to time. But we are in a golden age of toys. I mean, just at my desk right now, I've got freaking torch with giant flames coming out. I've got this independently created.
If 10 years ago, would you have been able to believe that would be a product that you could buy?
No, but even more so, like all the independent stuff that's coming out right now, like I cannot take these things off of my desk. Like, no matter what kind of toys, look at the bubble helmet on this guy.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
They're phenomenal.
And I think that almost is when you do get down to that little vocal minority of people who aren't happy with anything. One, they're looking for attention, and two, no matter what comes out, they're just never going to be satisfied.
I don't know if it's I think some of them are looking for attention, but I think that there's a lot. I try to be empathetic with it, but I think there's a lot of it where, quite honestly, I think there's a very large group of people that really want all this stuff and they can't afford it. And you can only afford so much.
Yeah.
Like, I'm only going to be able to buy 6 toys this month, which is still a shitload.
Yeah.
Compared to a normal person. Like, you are an active collector of toys, but they want 20 things. But it's a lot easier to be like, I don't like it. It sucks. It's terrible. Well, I heard the paint's awful. I don't like that. I don't like this. And tell yourself
Right. To justify.
that it's not that, because otherwise the feeling that you have on the flip side is just, God, unhappiness and unfulfillment. And Lord knows, I'd rather you tell yourself that than feel crushed by the weight of it all. I can be wrong, but I believe with a lot of these people is that it's more, you know, a good bit of just trying to deal with their own frustrations about, fuck, there is so much rad shit. And the reality is I'm never going to be able to do that.
Yeah. You can't get it all.
And that's a heavy thing to have to deal with. So it's a lot easier then to be like, well, I don't like it. And I need to keep telling myself and everyone else that I don't like it.
Well, you know, and I think, again, that goes beyond just toy collecting. I think in whether it's media, day-to-day life, there's all kinds of, it's not enough to just say, that's not for me, I can't have that. You also have to build up this justification in your head. Well, not only is that not for me, or not only can I not be involved with that, but it's bad and I have to actively hate it.
Yeah. I think we've spent our time on that. Why don't we?
Yeah, we have. Let's move back to some fun, silly toys. Well, G.I. Joe stuff specifically. So we've determined reaction continuing in some form. Yes. Reaction Plus headed to Target, headed to, yes. Well, we already know whether it was supposed to happen or not. One of those retailers slipped some pre-orders through a little early. I
can't comment on that.
And so lots going on the Reaction Plus front. Ultimates continuing on. G.I. Joe, basically bottom line, G.I. Joe very healthy at Super 7.
Yeah. There's a reason I'm like, yeah, let's start another format. Let's get this party started.
Right.
Well, not with the, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but like not with the caveat that, from the get-go, we're like, O-ring would be awesome. But, Hasbro, to their credit, I mean, let's back up maybe, because I said this to a lot of people at Joe Fest, and maybe no one's here heard it. So I'm going to take a step back. Like,
sure.
First off, we've approached Hasbro for quite some time about G.I. Joe, and the answer was solidly no. If you think about Hasbro, G.I. Joe is their Barbie. Like, yeah. G.I. Joe, while they made other toys, G.I. Joe is what made Hasbro. And as a company, that is one of the things they still make. They make G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
Hasbro makes G.I. Joe. It is not a license. It is not this is us.
Every bit of that is theirs.
For you to make us, we're a toy company. For another toy company to make us, you're asking a lot. Where Transformers, people be like, what about Transformers? Well, Transformers is them and Takara.
Right.
Right. That's not just Hasbro. And that was developed overseas and then brought back over. So like, that's not the same thing. So it took a long time for us to get the confidence from Hasbro that we could do something with G.I. Joe that was right for the brand and also non-competitive and felt ultimately like it is an extension of Hasbro. I mean, obviously we started with Transformers and Power Rangers. We worked in multiple formats. And so when we went to them, like, we would always pitch O-ring among other things, but they really came back and said, look, you guys are most famous for reaction. That is what you do. So if we let you do G.I. Joe, you can make reaction G.I. Joe because that's Super 7's version of G.I. Joe, not Hasbro's version, because Hasbro doesn't do that. And so I want to be very clear, like that alone was a massive step for Hasbro. And I'm not trying to, even saying it that way makes it sound negative. Like they entrusted their most precious brand to us, which is not insignificant.
Well, it's like handing your kid over to somebody else to raise for a little while.
and so we then proved that we could do well within reaction. That allowed us to get into ultimates, which, we had to have a lot of, conversations about how and why this is going to be radically different from what's going on in classified. It's radically different in the source inspiration. It's radically different in the fit and finish and articulation pattern. And we're really classified is very much talking about a contemporary moment within the G.I. Joe world. And we're saying, we're going back to cartoon Sunbow walked off the screen, and these are very different worlds. So we're speaking very much to a retro only customer. And then from that, and then that came out really well. And then, we worked our way into them trying to decide and understand, could we get into O-ring without muddying the waters or some other version of that, of what they do. And because they are still, O-ring G.I. Joe is Hasbro. Make no bones about it. What I'm making is a line extension to what they do, if you will. So when people talk about this, I want to be very clear that I am humbled and appreciative that we are getting to do this, but it is at their grace.
Yeah.
And that sounds negative. It's not supposed to.
No.
It is at their grace that they are allowing us to do this. And to be real, we're going to come out here in October with the only O-ring G.I. Joes that have ever been made that are not by Hasbro. And that is not an insignificant thing to not feel the weight of.
Yeah.
And so I think for so many people, they want to be like, why don't they do this? Hasbro is thinking about G.I. Joe at a level that is not tied to what's coming out this week. It's years, it's decades, it's the entirety of the history, going back to scars on cheeks on 12-inch figures. G.I. Joe isn't simply just what you think it is. That's right. It is so much bigger. And, when people are like, they're stupid because they don't do this. I'm talking about it from the fan perspective.
Sure.
You hear those comments, and it's like, you guys have no idea about the mechanics of what G.I. Joe actually is. And one of the things I would say to them, said to people, they were saying, I was like, the newest movie that just came out, say it was Snake Eyes, the movie that just came out. The worst performing figure from that movie still outsold every retro product you want to make.
Yeah.
Because that's a different customer. They're selling to kids again. Remember when you were a kid and you bought toys? There's a lot more of them. And that's their job. But I'm off on a tangent a little bit. But the point I'm trying to be is when people are like, well, why don't you do this or that? The fact that we've gotten here is a testament to Hasbro and their willingness to allow people to play with their baby, which is not insignificant. And the fact that companies like us have been able to come there and said, we will do right and prove to you that we can take care of and shepherd parts of your brand and parts of your story. So, in that regard here, not that anybody's watching it at this point because we're 2 hours in, is that they've given us an opportunity that I am very, very appreciative of, because no one in the history of toys has ever gotten this opportunity. And I think that it's the combination of what the fans want and that they're still here. That's a legacy to what they created back in the 80s, as well as what we're doing and Hasbro's vision for what G.I. Joe can be in the future. You're just looking at it through this pinhole. They're looking at it through everything.
Yeah.
So anyways.
Well, I think, and we'll wrap up in just a couple of minutes here. You've been very, very generous with your time, and I appreciate it.
Hey, I'm talking about toys.
I think Joe fans maybe more than any other fandom, have an understanding and respect for the relationship that Hasbro has with G.I. Joe. I do think it's recognized how special it is that it's a completely in-house brand, and that Hasbro has, have maintained it essentially all this time. There have been very few years where there was zero G.I. Joe. And it's really an amazing thing to think. So if people think, oh, well, Hasbro doesn't care, they're doing this way, or they're letting Super 7 do this or whatever, Hasbro cares very much, because they have kept this brand alive even without media, even when they haven't had cartoons, or, well, comics have been pretty much nonstop, but like cartoons, movies, whatever, those things that, as you mentioned, are so vital to sales, they have kept it alive. And I mean, look at it now. We said we're in a golden age of toys, but my gosh, we're in a golden age of G.I. Joe, but maybe rivaling the 80s at this point.
Probably, with the sheer number of SKUs, there's probably more toys coming out now than there were in the 80s.
Oh, 100%. Because what, in the 80s, they would put out a few, whatever, a dozen, 18, whatever figures at the beginning of the year, and those kind of just lasted the year.
Yeah. I would say that you touched on something, and I already derailed myself, which is unfortunately all too common in that, which is, when people say, well, they gave up on it, there was no product for a year and a half. Product development cycles sometimes for these companies can be 3 to 5 years.
Right.
The reason nothing came out is probably because they were like, look, what we're doing right now isn't quite right. Let's reboot and rebuild G.I. Joe. Well, that means there's going to be a gap till it comes out. That means they're actively working on it. It's just, you're like, nothing came out on shelf. Nothing came out on shelf because we're working on what's coming out 2 years from now.
Right.
And it's a whole reboot, and it's a whole redone, and it's a whole lot. And it's like, no, it's because we're putting all that effort into this, So I don't think that there's been a case where it's like they don't care, but I think that's I'm going to use this word and somebody's going to complain, but it's a very selfish point of view. Like,
sure,
they're working on it in a much larger strategy, much longer term vision for what G.I. Joe can be in those years where people are like, they don't care about the brand. And you're looking at it only from your slice of G.I. Joe fandom, not the whole pie.
Well, I think
same thing. Like, while we know it's diminished, there's still a 12-inch G.I. Joe collector out there.
Right.
But nobody listening to this podcast is worried about them.
Gosh, you're right.
Nobody.
Yeah.
But there's still that guy out there.
Yeah.
And there's still a whole different generation of people that just love 12-inch figures that came in through the back door, through Metacom, through Sideshow, through Hot Toys, through any number of other things that are like, I really like 12-inch figures. There's nothing really being done on that. I mean, think about the people that and I can't remember the brand for the life of me, unfortunately, but that really brought back Mego, because Marty Abrams is on it, but it's not, other people really were working on it. But like, you're talking about a small group of people about a product that was made for a very short amount of time, and they built Mego back into something.
Right.
Like, there are so many different other factions of people that collect and deal with these IPs. Like, G.I. Joe is 60 years old?
Was it 1964? Oh gosh.
62? I don't know.
Anyways,
60,
64, because this 60th anniversary stuff came out. Yeah.
Okay. So, it's got 60 years. You're concerned about what happened from 1982 to 1986.
Right.
And that's it.
Right.
You're not talking about the other 56 years. Like, there's a lot more. So it's always really hard for me where I'm like, you have to realize that you're not the only fan in the room. That's the hardest part. And obviously we get into those narrow slices. That's what we do. It's like, I'm going to talk to the guy that's only interested in this. And I'm going to talk to the guy that's only interested in this. But that's our job. Somebody else's job is the other parts.
Well, and that's what's been so much fun about, because my years were 82 to 87, but I've had a blast learning about 88 to 94. Like, I'm discovering a whole
like the aliens?
Yes.
The zombies?
Right. Like all that weird stuff that for years I was like, it's too much.
Yeah, you see it, like pink, fluorescent pink card backs?
Right.
Is that G.I. Joe? Like,
Heck yeah.
actually, it's pretty rad too.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, and I think that's the thing. It's like there's so much more, and people always get caught up in only what they think
What
it is.
they do, right?
Not what the whole of it is. And you really do have to take a step back and look at the whole of it.
And we like to say GI Joe is for everyone. And I also would like to say that all of GI Joe is for anyone. Start digging into it. There's so much fun, weird stuff outside of our little Real American Hero circle that can be gotten into. And we talk about it on the show all the time. Christian in particular will bring up like Super Joe and stuff like that. There's tons of GI Joe to enjoy, and Super 7 very soon will be bringing even more GI Joe into the world. Real quick, San Diego Comic-Con, we will be seeing Paint Masters. Is that correct?
It's back and forth. I have some Paint Masters, but there's back and forth between whether or not we will be showing the blue prototypes again or the Paint Masters. It looks like more than likely we will be showing the blue prototypes again.
Okay.
Saving the Paint Masters for sometime after Comic-Con.
Well, and honestly, showing those again is not the worst thing in the world, because San Diego Comic-Con, there are going to be so many more eyes on them, so much more exposure. I mean, they got out there pretty good from Joe Fest, but
I think the diehard Joe guy is going to be like, I already saw that. Come on.
Right.
Next?
Right. But that's okay, because then they
were ready for those Paint Masters
at Joe Fest
after,
right,
showed the blue ones.
Right. You're bringing the Paint Masters out tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. This has been an incredible conversation.
I hope I felt like I was really, pontificating a bit too aggressively there at the end, but
Hey, it happens. Look, we're toy collectors, and we're talking about toy collecting. If there's no passion involved, then what are we even doing? Well, thank you so much. Hope to see you on the show again in the future, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, that was great.
Smash that like button if you like Needless Things.